Still, the lavender scent filled my office as my husband laughed about my useless psychology degree and stepped inside like he owned the room. As I capped my pen without looking up, I kept my voice calm and my hands steady, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. While the lavender grew sharper in the quiet, my new patient froze and stared at him with a fear I couldn't ignore. The same scent followed my thoughts as she whispered a name that wasn't his, and I felt my training finally click into place. That's when I realized he hadn't spent years belittling my work because it was weak, but because it could see him clearly. Still breathing evenly, I decided I wouldn't confront him. I'd let the truth introduce itself. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The morning light hit the kitchen in a way that made everything look too honest. The counter was cluttered with yesterday's coffee mugs, crumbs scattered like a trail of failed intentions, and fingerprints on the refrigerator door. The harsh glow made everything feel exposed, the kind of honesty I didn't want to see. And in that kitchen, standing next to the half-empty cereal box, I could feel the tension between Caleb and me growing thicker by the second. He was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone with that detached, absorbed expression he always had when he was pretending not to notice me. His jaw clenched every now and then as he read whatever email or news article had his attention today, but his eyes never met mine. He didn't need to. Not when he could talk over me. Honestly, he muttered, these people with their therapy talk, so pathetic. They just want attention. His voice had that sharp edge, the one that made my stomach drop. I had spent years getting my degree, working hard to build a practice I was proud of. But here he was, once again minimizing everything I'd worked for. My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter as I tried to keep my breath steady. He wasn't even looking at me when he said it, like it was just an offhand comment, a jab from a distance. But the sting of it dug deep. I moved to the fridge to grab some milk, trying to ignore the heaviness in the air. I help people, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. And you know that. Caleb didn't lift his eyes from the screen. Yeah, sure. Playing therapist today. Or doing some real work, he said. The quote marks around real work, hanging in the air like a challenge. I could feel my face flush, but I didn't let it show. He'd said worse. I went to pour my coffee, but the sound of the milk splashing into the mug felt too loud in the silence. I was trying to stay calm, not to let his words worm their way under my skin. But it was hard when he always made it seem like everything I did, everything that was meaningful to me, was nothing more than a game. He looked up at me then, as if realizing I hadn't yet crumbled, and gave me that smile, the one that made my stomach churn. It was fake, polished, like the kind of smile you give a dog when you pat its head and say, "Good boy." He leaned in, kissed my forehead lightly, his lips lingering for just a second too long. "You're cute when you get all worked up," he said, as if I was just a pet getting a little too excited over nothing. His voice had that dismissive tone, like I was a child he had to gently correct. I took a breath, fighting the instinct to lash out. "I'm not worked up, Caleb. I'm just trying to—" He cut me off, his hand still holding the phone like it was the most important thing in the world. "Relax. I'm just being honest," he said, the words ringing in the air like a final, unassailable statement. He didn't care if I disagreed, didn't care if it hurt. He was just being honest. The truth was, it wasn't honesty. It was control. It was belittling. And somehow, every time he did it, I found myself questioning my own worth. He leaned back in his chair, the chair that was more expensive than most of my patients could ever afford to sit in, and stretched his legs out in that familiar way that made him look like he owned the room. "And remember," he added with that same too casual tone, "I pay the real bills around here. You know, the ones that matter. You just help people with their feelings." He always had to remind me of that. He was always the one who paid the real bills, even though in reality my income contributed. I worked hard, but somehow in his eyes, none of that mattered. It didn't matter how many hours I spent listening to people's pain, helping them navigate the darkest parts of their lives. To him, it was a joke. I gripped the mug tighter, the heat from the coffee seeping into my fingers, but it didn't ground me. His words had a way of sinking in like quicksand. "I contribute," I said, my voice more fragile than I wanted it to be. He didn't even flinch. Sure, he muttered like he didn't care. "But you know, it's me who's holding this whole thing together. I'm the one who makes sure we don't end up in debt, so don't forget that." My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't let him see. I didn't let him see how his words made me feel small, how they chipped away at me little by little, each time I let him get away with it. The worst part was that I let him. He'd laugh it off, dismiss it, and I'd be left there, questioning everything I'd ever believed about myself. But this time, I didn't let it go. I didn't laugh or brush it off. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I could see, in his eyes, the way he wanted me to stay small. He wanted me to believe that everything I was, everything I had worked for, didn't matter. And the worst part was, for a second, I almost believed him. But I couldn't. Not this time. Today I know the truth. His mockery wasn't about my degree. It was about controlling me. And for a while, I let him. But that time was over. The lavender scent in my office always made things feel calmer, safer, like the room was a haven where people could finally breathe. The soft light from the desk lamp was meant to help people feel at ease, and it usually did. It made the truth feel less sharp, less dangerous. But today, it felt like I was in a room filled with tension that I couldn't cut through. Maya sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an exit. She barely looked at me, her gaze skimming over the artwork, the shelves of books, the window where the morning light was just starting to creep in. Her body was tense, like she was waiting for something, maybe for me to say the wrong thing, maybe for the door to open and let her escape. "I'm Maya," she said, her voice a little shaky. I've been thinking about coming here for a while." I nodded, trying to keep things light, to let her know it was okay to take her time. "There's no rush. Just talk when you're ready." But she didn't speak at first. She just sat there, looking everywhere but at me, and I could feel the silence stretching between us, thick and heavy. I wasn't sure how to fill it, so I offered the grounding techniques I always use to start, a way to help her connect with the present. I described the breath work, the simple focus on the here and now, but as I spoke, Caleb's voice slipped into my mind. "This is fake work," he'd said so many times, "a waste of time. You're just playing therapist." I hated that I could still hear him, even here, in the space where I was supposed to feel safe, where I was supposed to help others find safety. His words had always been a thorn, but now, in the quiet of my office, they felt like poison. I hated that he still had this power over me, even when I was trying to focus on someone else's pain. Maya took a shaky breath, and then, almost in a whisper, she started. "There's a man. He's not who he seems." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "He's charming at first, but then he controls. He uses fear." My heart tightened. This sounded too familiar, too close. I leaned forward, my eyes on her. "Tell me more," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maya's hands fidgeted, her nails pressing into her palms. "He knows how to make people feel like they owe him something, like he owns them," she said. It's not just what he does. It's how he makes you feel. Small." I nodded, my thoughts racing. I could feel the familiar tension building. I had heard this story before, maybe not in the same way, but the manipulation, the control, the fear, it was too real, too close to home. Then she said something that stopped me cold. "He wears a signet ring," she whispered, "a scratched corner." My pulse jumped. I knew that ring. I'd seen it before. Caleb's ring. Today I know that sometimes the smallest details, the ones that seem insignificant, are the ones that expose everything. I could feel the air between us thicken as Maya hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she fidgeted with the sleeve of her cardigan. The silence in the room was heavier now, charged with something I couldn't put my finger on. She had already shared so much. Her fear, the way this man controlled her, twisted his charm into something suffocating. But now she was holding back something, and I knew it. I could see it in her eyes, the way she wanted to speak but couldn't. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let my own nerves show. "Maya, you don't have to say it if you're not ready, but I'm here to listen." She glanced at me, eyes flicking to the door as if the escape route had already been planned. She exhaled, long and slow, and then whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear, "Drew." It wasn't just the name that made my stomach lurch. It was the way she said it, like it had been a weight on her chest for too long, like she had been trying to keep it buried, and now it was finally slipping out uninvited. I didn't let my expression falter. I kept my face neutral, even though inside I was already spiraling. Drew wasn't just a name. It was a piece of a puzzle that I hadn't even realized I was solving. My breath hitched slightly as I forced myself to focus on Maya. I cleared my throat to cover the sudden spike of panic. "That's the name he goes by?" I asked, keeping my voice professional, trying to ignore the thudding of my heart in my chest. She nodded, biting her lip like the name was a secret she wasn't sure should be spoken aloud. "Yeah, Drew. He's a volunteer, part of some nonprofit, always doing things for the community. He's someone people trust, someone safe." Her words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, thick with something unspoken, and I felt the words she wasn't saying begin to wrap around me, pulling tighter. He was safe? I forced myself to take another steadying breath, scribbling something on my notepad to mask the trembling of my hand. Safe. The word rattled in my mind, spinning like a question mark. Safe. How many people had told me that about Caleb before? How many times had I heard the words, "He's a good man," and how many times had I swallowed it just like everyone else? My hands didn't shake. Not on the outside anyway, but inside I felt ridiculous, like a wife who didn't even know her own home address. "Do you see him often?" I asked, trying to stay detached. I needed to stay in control here, to keep my composure, but I could feel the growing weight of the question I was already too scared to ask. Maya shifted in her chair, her eyes avoiding mine. He travels, for work mostly. He's in finance tech. He goes to conferences, ones that, last longer than they're supposed to. I think..." She trailed off, staring at the floor, and I could hear the faintest tremor in her voice. "I think they're disappearances." Disappearances. The word hit me like a slap in the face. I forced myself to stay calm, but the thought that kept crashing into me. How many lies had I missed? Felt like it might swallow me whole. I could hear Caleb's voice in my head, his dismissive tone, his constant, quiet gaslighting. "This is fake work, Lauren. Why do you care so much? It's just another client, just another story. And now this." Now I was hearing about a man who wasn't just a shadow in the background, who didn't just exist in a room full of strangers. This man, Drew, was someone who had slipped into Maya's life with the same ease Caleb had slipped into mine. Manipulative, clever, hiding behind facades. I tried to push the thought away to focus on Maya. She was the one I needed to help. "How often does he disappear?" I asked, my voice softer this time, almost gentle. She swallowed hard before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every couple of months. He leaves for a conference, but the timing doesn't match up. It's like he's gone for days, sometimes a week, but no one knows where." I kept my eyes on her, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand answers, to ask her if she thought this Drew might be more than just a man with a missing conference schedule. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to keep my head. For her. For myself. The name Drew lingered in my mind like an unanswered question, and I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that I knew exactly where I had heard it before. I knew exactly where I had seen the pattern before. Today, I understand that sometimes you don't need a sign. Sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight, buried under names you don't recognize. But once you hear it, once you know, it never leaves. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my office grew closer, and I recognized the rhythm immediately. Caleb. I felt my chest tighten before the door even opened. I tried to focus on Maya, who was sitting across from me, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. I had just started to guide her through a grounding exercise when I heard the familiar click of the door handle turning. Caleb stood in the doorway, smiling, holding my forgotten lunch in one hand. His other hand rested casually on the doorframe, like he was showing off his perfectly curated role of the supportive husband. "Forgot your lunch," he said too loudly, his voice echoing down the hallway. My wife, the therapist, always so busy. My heart sank. He always did this, reduced what I did to something trivial. My wife helps people with their feelings. It wasn't just a statement, it was a jab. He was belittling my work, making it sound like a hobby, not something I had spent years building. I tried not to let it show, but it stung. I could feel my face flush with the humiliation he'd just casually handed me. Maya's gaze shot to him instantly, her eyes widening. She stiffened, her body going rigid, as though she'd seen something out of place, something dangerous. The look on her face was hard to miss, even though she quickly looked away. But I saw it. "Then," Maya whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "No, it's you." I froze. The words hung in the air like a silent scream. Maya wasn't just reacting to Caleb being here. She was reacting to him. Him. I could see the fear in her eyes, the recognition. Her body trembled slightly, and I could feel the air shift. It was as if she had just connected the dots in some way that I wasn't fully understanding yet. Caleb, still smiling, hadn't caught the tension. His eyes flicked to her, and for a brief moment something flashed in his expression. Something quick, like recognition. But it was gone in the blink of an eye, replaced by the same mask of politeness he wore in public. "Good to meet you, Maya," he said smoothly, offering a handshake that felt like it could break your bones if you weren't careful. "How's everything going with Lauren?" Maya didn't respond right away, her mouth opening slightly as if she was trying to piece things together. She glanced at me, then back at him, but said nothing. Her gaze was distant, lost in thought, as if she had just discovered something terrible and didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I had to break the tension. "Caleb," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it, "I'm in session." For a moment, he just stood there, lingering in the doorway, as if he could still control the situation. He didn't move, his eyes darting between Maya and me. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly, that fake smile still glued to his face. "All right, babe," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'll let you get back to your work." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The door clicked softly behind him, and the silence between Maya and me felt heavy, loaded with the unspoken. Maya didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the door, her expression unreadable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted. Something had broken open, and I didn't know what would come out. Today, I know that sometimes you don't have to speak to make a statement. Sometimes, just the smallest shift in the air, the slightest look of recognition, can speak louder than any words ever could. I sat there trying to steady my breath as Maya apologized again, her voice shaky, like she had somehow disrupted everything. "I'm so sorry, Lauren. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I thought I recognized him. I didn't know. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hands gripped her lap as if she could anchor herself to the chair. But her apology felt like a weight she didn't deserve to carry. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't her fault that Caleb had slipped in like a shadow, that this whole facade of mine had come crashing down. "It's okay, Maya," I said, my voice a little steadier than I felt. I wanted to reassure her, but something inside of me was already unraveling. Caleb's support, his fake smiles, his constant minimization of my work, of me, was all just a costume. I was starting to see that now, and it made me feel foolish. I had played the role of a supportive wife for so long, but I had been living in a lie. Maya shifted in her seat, her gaze flicking to the floor as if she were trying to gather her thoughts. "There's more, Lauren," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you everything." I leaned forward slightly, urging her to continue. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the anxiety that clung to her every word, but I needed to know what she was going to say. I had no idea how deep this went, but I had to hear it. "I met Drew through a nonprofit mentorship program," Maya began. "I had just gotten out of a really bad breakup, and he was there, offering help, support. He was so understanding. He made me feel safe, like I wasn't just another broken person, but then..." Her voice trailed off, and I could hear the strain in it. "He started isolating me. He said he was protecting me, but really, he was pulling me away from everyone." I could feel my heart begin to race as she spoke. Drew. The name sent a cold shiver down my spine. She continued. "He used different names depending on who he was with. He was always someone different. It's like he's hiding behind masks, changing who he is to fit the situation." She hesitated before adding, "He threatened me, Lauren. He said if I talked, I wouldn't be safe. He told me that no one could know about him." The words "no one could know" hit me like a punch. Maya's next words froze me in place. "He said, my wife can't know." I felt like the world around me blurred. Drew wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't just someone outside my circle. He was in it. He had been in it the whole time. The man who had been controlling Maya had been living a double life, a life I had been a part of unknowingly. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she showed me screenshots. Drew's messages were chilling, demanding secrecy, warning her to stay silent. I could feel the weight of my responsibilities suddenly shift. I had to protect Maya, but I also had to protect myself. The lines were blurred, the danger closer than I had ever imagined. "I'm going to help you," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "but we need to be careful. We need to think this through. Today, I understand that some truths aren't just about others. They're about seeing how far you've let things go without realizing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it." I dialed Jess's number with a shaky hand, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the past few hours pressing down on me. Maya's frightened face, Caleb's casual dismissal, and the quiet realization that I had been living in a house of lies. The phone rang twice before Jessa picked up. "Lauren, what's going on?" Her voice was calm but concerned, like she could tell I was barely holding it together. "I think there's a conflict of interest with one of my patients," I said, my voice faltering as the words left my mouth. I hated how small I sounded. Jessa paused for a moment, the shuffle of papers in the background, a grounding sound like she was preparing herself. "Okay," she said. "What's the situation?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Maya. One of my new patients, she recognized my husband today. She knows him by a different name, says he's been manipulating her. She's terrified, Jessa, and I think he's been doing the same to me." I heard her inhale sharply, the silence between us heavy. "That's serious. Lauren, we need to follow protocol. You need to protect both yourself and your patient." "I know," I said, feeling the shame creep up. Why hadn't I seen it before? Caleb's behavior wasn't just controlling, it was a web of lies, and I had been tangled in it. Jess's voice was firm as she spoke again. I'll reassign Maya to another therapist temporarily to avoid any dual relationship issues. I'll document the situation, but we'll need to take further steps. This isn't just a patient confidentiality issue anymore. This is about your safety, too. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For a moment, I felt like someone had thrown me a lifeline. Jessa was handling it, taking the reins. But then, in the quiet of the moment, I felt a deep wave of humiliation, even while I was doing everything right. I heard Caleb's old voice in my head mocking me. "Useless degree, Lauren. You're overreacting." The words were so familiar. They were like a shadow that followed me everywhere, always there, always ready to make me second-guess myself. The ache of it was sharp, even as I took the necessary steps to protect myself. "Lauren?" Jess's voice broke through my spiral. "Are you still there?" "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm here, thank you." "I'll handle it from here," she said. "But you should also contact legal counsel, separate from patient files. This is personal now. We need to make sure everything is done right." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My personal life was no longer separate from my work. Everything was tangled together, and the more I tried to untangle it, the more I felt like I was losing control. After we ended the call, I reached for my phone again, my hands trembling. I had to tell Nora. She was the one person who had always kept me grounded. I typed quickly, my fingers moving faster than I could think. "Something is wrong with Caleb. Really wrong." I stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me. Today I know that even when you do everything right, the past still finds ways to haunt you, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting. I stepped into the house, and the sharp scent of lemon cleaner hit me immediately, followed by something metallic, almost like fear clinging to the air. The house smelled too clean, too forced, like it was hiding something under the surface. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but I could feel it, an undercurrent of tension that was impossible to ignore. Caleb was on the couch, eyes glued to his phone, the TV murmuring softly in the background. He didn't even look up when I walked in. It was the same routine every evening, like we were stuck in some well-rehearsed play, each of us knowing our lines, but not truly connecting. I felt the weight of his indifference pressing down on me, suffocating the space between us. After a few seconds, Caleb finally glanced up, breaking the silence. "So, the patient who recognized me today? What's going on with that?" I stiffened. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. "It's nothing, Caleb. Just a patient who had a moment of confusion." He didn't buy it. His eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into a knowing smirk, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A moment of confusion? Are you sure you're not overreacting?" "You seem a little worked up about this." Micro-humiliation. It washed over me like a wave. Every word out of his mouth was meant to strip me of my power, to make me feel small, irrational. It was a game he played often, poking and prodding to see how far he could push before I snapped. I stayed calm. "Don't give him anything," I reminded myself. "I'm not overreacting. I'm just handling the situation." His voice sharpened, the casual tone slipping away. "Really? Because it sounds like you're letting your emotions get the best of you. Don't get emotional, Lauren." There it was, the phrase that always made my stomach churn. Don't get emotional. As if my feelings, my responses to his behavior, were some kind of weakness. It wasn't the first time he had used that line, and every time it cut deeper, making me question my own sanity. I bit back the retort rising in my throat, choosing instead to take a breath, to stay measured. "I'm fine, Caleb. It's just a lot, that's all." But he wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his eyes hardening, and his words came out low and cold. "You're bringing work drama home again. You know, you could make things a lot easier on yourself if you just played along." His voice dropped, the subtle threat hanging in the air between us. "I could make things hard for you financially, Lauren, if you want to keep playing these games." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could feel the weight of his control closing in, suffocating the room, threatening to swallow me whole. I gave nothing away, my voice flat as I replied, "I'm not playing games, Caleb." His eyes flicked to mine for a moment, searching for a crack, a sign of weakness. But I held my ground. The tension was thick now, the kind of silence that suffocates you from the inside. Today I know that sometimes the smallest moments of silence hold the most power. And sometimes you have to protect yourself, even when the world around you is trying to convince you that you're overreacting. I sat in front of the computer, the light from the screen casting a pale glow on my face. The quiet clicking of the keyboard filled the room as I scrolled through public records, following the careful steps Elliot had shown me to keep everything above board. Every search felt like a small victory, but also a step deeper into something I wasn't sure I could handle. I was determined to find the truth, but with every click, I could feel my stomach twist tighter. I had to remind myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't violating anyone's privacy, not even Caleb's. But in the back of my mind, I could still hear him, his voice from so many times before when I'd question things. "Stop nagging," he'd say. "You're being paranoid." It was as if every ounce of curiosity had been framed as some flaw in me, something unnecessary, something that made me small. I clicked on a LinkedIn profile and my breath caught. Drew Hale. The name made my heart skip. There was a photo, Caleb's face, no doubt about it, but something was off. His hair was styled differently. The job title didn't match anything I knew about him. The volunteer work listed seemed foreign to me. I leaned closer to the screen, feeling the cold rush of realization hit me. It wasn't just a name. It was Caleb, but a version of him I had never seen before. A different version. A version that didn't belong to me. My fingers trembled as I scrolled, hunting for more. It didn't take long before I found it. A nonprofit board page with Drew Hale listed as a donor and mentor. I clicked through, my eyes darting across the screen, and then my stomach lurched. There were photos. His face was there, staring back at me. Caleb's face, but not the man I thought I knew. The man in these pictures was someone else, someone I didn't recognize, hidden behind layers of manipulation. The weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. He had built a life for me, a life full of lies. I felt a cold sweat form on my skin. I needed someone to confirm it. I couldn't process this on my own. I texted Nora, my heart pounding as I typed, "Check out the LinkedIn page for Drew Hale. Look at the photo. Is this Caleb?" Within moments, she responded, her words steady but laced with the gravity of what I was about to hear. "I'm looking. I see it. The ring, the scar near his thumb. That laugh in the video. It's him, Lauren." I sank back in my chair, the reality crashing in. Drew Hale wasn't just a man from my patient's past. He was Caleb, living a second life, a life I never even suspected. Everything I thought I knew had been a lie. Every image, every piece of information pointed back to him. Today I know that sometimes the truth isn't a single, dramatic revelation. It's a series of small details, each one building on the last until it all comes crashing down. And when you finally see the full picture, there's no going back. The corporate building's fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a sterile glow that drained the life out of the room. It made everyone look tired, almost too honest, like the artificial light had stripped away the pretense. Caleb sat across from me, his usual charm too polished to belong in a room like this, too rehearsed, too empty. The tension between us was palpable. He kept his eyes on the table, his fingers tapping nervously, but I could tell he was trying to hold on to the facade of control. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. Mr. Klein, the compliance officer, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his voice sharp as he addressed Caleb. "We need to talk about the dual identities you've been using, your involvement with Drew Hale, and the conflicts of interest that have surfaced. There's also the matter of company resources being misused. Caleb's face didn't betray a flicker of emotion, but I could feel his discomfort. The subtle shift in his posture. He was trying to stay calm, but I knew him too well. The more control he lost, the more desperate he'd become. He broke the silence with a forced chuckle, his eyes flicking to mine. "So, is this about my wife's feelings?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The room fell silent, the joke flat like it had missed its mark by miles. No one laughed, not even a polite chuckle. It was like the air had thickened, the tension suffocating us. Caleb's attempt to dismiss the situation with humor only highlighted his discomfort. Mr. Klein didn't acknowledge the joke. "We're not discussing personal feelings," he said, his voice unwavering. "This is about your actions, your conduct." I watched Caleb's face tighten, his usual calm demeanor cracking as Mr. Klein listed the charges. Elliot, my attorney, slid a thick stack of papers across the table. He spoke with quiet authority, his voice steady. "We have documentation from public sources, 2 phones, 2 email domains, donor records, and inconsistencies in travel expenses. This is all verifiable." I could see Caleb's jaw clench as the weight of the evidence settled in. He shifted uncomfortably, and I could tell the room was closing in on him. He couldn't deny it. His lies were out in the open, and no amount of charm would cover it now. Mr. Klein leaned forward, his words crisp and clinical. "Risk exposure, mandatory reporting." His gaze flickered between Caleb and me. These are not terms that bend for charisma. Caleb's usual self-assurance faltered, and his voice took on a defensive edge. "This is absurd. She's overreacting. My wife—" He gestured toward me, his expression dripping with contempt. "She's unstable." I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't let it show. This wasn't about me. This was about exposing the truth. Elliot calmly cut in, his voice cool and direct. "We're not discussing her emotions," he said. "We're discussing your conduct, and the evidence is clear." The room went quiet as Caleb sat there, his face flushed, unable to talk his way out of it. The power had shifted, and there was no way back. Today I know that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It's in those quiet moments when everything falls apart, when the truth is undeniable and the facade finally crumbles. The parking garage smelled like exhaust, the air heavy and stale, the sound of footsteps echoing off the concrete as Caleb approached. He was standing too close to me, like he was trying to suffocate the space between us. His presence always had that effect on me, filling up the air with tension, making everything feel like it was just his world and I was merely passing through. I could feel his eyes on me before I even turned to face him, his gaze cold and calculating. "You're going to lose everything," he said, his voice smooth, like he was reading the weather forecast rather than threatening me. The words hit harder than I expected, cutting through the thick air between us. He didn't raise his voice or try to intimidate me with grand gestures. It was just a simple statement, as if he already knew the outcome, as if I was already defeated in his mind. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. The suffocating weight of it all pressed against my chest. I opened my mouth to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. How many times had I been here standing in front of him, trying to muster the strength to fight back, only for him to shut me down with a glance or a comment? Caleb took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked me over. "You're really going to drag your patient into this?" he asked, his voice laced with feigned disbelief. "This isn't your fight, Lauren." His words stung in ways I didn't want to admit. He was trying to make me feel guilty for seeking the truth, for exposing the lies he had been weaving for so long. He wanted me to question my actions, to make me feel like I was overstepping, like I was the one doing something wrong. But I wasn't wrong. I wasn't the one hiding behind a facade. "You've been violating those ethics for years," I shot back, my voice steadier than I felt. "And you think you can manipulate me into being quiet about it?" His smile grew wider, but it was cold, empty. "You really don't know what you're up against, do you?" he said, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I can make it all disappear. Your career, everything." I could feel my skin crawl at his words. He was trying to control me again, just like he always did. And for a moment, I felt the pull of it. The same fear, the same guilt he had used to trap me before. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I walked away, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for my phone. Elliot's calm, steady voice on the other end of the line was the only thing that anchored me as I drove home. "Immediate safety steps, Lauren," he advised. "Separate for now, document everything. No private conversations." The words felt like a lifeline, a clear path in the chaos Caleb had created. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a plan. As I drove home, I texted Nora, "Caleb just threatened me." Her reply came immediately, "I'm here. Stay on the phone with me." Today, I know that sometimes a threat doesn't need to be loud to be dangerous, but I also know that you don't have to face it alone, and I wasn't going to let him control me anymore. I rushed into the bank, the cold air conditioning hitting me first, followed by the smell of carpet shampoo and freshly printed paper. The lobby felt sterile, almost oppressive, like it was closing in on me with every step. My heart raced, each beat reminding me that something was horribly wrong. Caleb had always kept me in the dark, controlled everything, but this felt like a new low. I walked up to the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The teller barely glanced up as she greeted me, her voice flat. "How can I help you today?" "I need to check on some transactions. I think there's been some activity on my account that I didn't authorize," I said, trying to sound calm. But inside, everything was unraveling. The teller tapped her keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen. "Did your husband authorize it?" she asked, the question so casual, as if it was normal to assume his word had more weight than mine. My chest tightened. I almost didn't want to answer. Her question felt like a punch to the gut, as if my consent didn't even matter. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "No, I did not authorize any transactions." She barely acknowledged my response, still tapping away at the computer. "There have been attempts to transfer funds and open a line of credit using your profile," she said, her voice cold, professional, but the words hit like a wrecking ball. "It looks like fraudulent activity." I felt my stomach drop. Fraud. My head swam. Caleb's reach had gone further than I thought, and I was only beginning to realize how deep this ran. His control wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. The teller handed me a form to sign, but I could hardly focus on it. My mind was racing, my heart thudding in my chest. The reality of what Caleb had done, how far he had gone to cover his tracks, was sinking in, and it was suffocating. I left the bank as fast as I could, fumbling for my phone. As soon as I was in the car, I called Elliot, my attorney. His calm voice on the other end was the only thing keeping me grounded. "Lauren." "What happened?" he asked, the concern in his voice obvious. "They've been using my information, trying to open credit lines and transfer funds," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need help." Elliot's tone immediately turned more serious. "I'll file an emergency motion to restrain the marital assets and prevent any new debt from being taken in your name. We'll stop this right now." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. His words gave me a sliver of hope. It wasn't over yet. Caleb might have been trying to take everything, but I wasn't going to let him. As I drove home, my mind raced with everything I had learned. The phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Detective Sato. "I'm looking into the alias. Aliases leave paper trails. We'll find it." The words felt like a jolt of electricity running through me. Caleb's double life wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a fact. And I was going to make sure it all came crashing down. Today I know that some battles don't need to be fought alone. And once you take the first step, you can start to reclaim everything you've lost. The days blurred together after the bank incident. I spent hours combing through documents, speaking with Elliot, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. Caleb's lies, Drew's manipulation, everything felt like a web that was tightening around me, and the more I pulled, the more I realized how deep it all ran. Then, the complaints started to surface. They came through the right channels, official, anonymized reports that had been filed against Drew Hale. Slowly, the pieces clicked into place. He wasn't just a name in my patient's story. He was a pattern. A predator. His victims were everywhere, scattered across different states, in different situations. He had manipulated, coerced, financially pressured, and threatened. The same playbook over and over, in every one of his dealings. I stared at the reports, the weight of it all sinking in. His abuse had spread like a virus, touching more lives than I could have imagined. I hadn't been the only one, not by a long shot, but there was something deeply personal in this revelation. Drew wasn't just an alias. He was a carefully constructed life, a carefully hidden pattern of manipulation and deceit. And Caleb had been part of it all. A cold realization settled over me like ice. Caleb had always mocked my degree, belittled my work, reduced my profession to something less. He'd always made me feel like my insights were unimportant, like my ability to read people, to recognize patterns, was a joke. He'd laughed it off as useless psychology and play therapist jabs, but now I understood. His ridicule wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. He wanted me to doubt myself, to question my own ability to see through his lies, his games. If he could make me question my judgment, if he could undermine my confidence, I'd never trust my own alarms. I would have kept living in the dark. My hands trembled as I read through the official complaints. I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger because he had done this to so many people, and relief because finally the truth was surfacing. Finally, the walls he had built were beginning to crumble. Elliot had already coordinated with the proper authorities, making sure patient confidentiality was respected while my personal case moved forward. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting others from Caleb's reach. I felt a small surge of gratitude for Elliot, his calm professionalism, and his determination to keep the case moving forward. But there was still so much to do. I had to protect myself. I had to leave. And that's where Nora came in. She helped me pack in silence. We didn't talk much, but there didn't need to be words. Every item I folded into the suitcase felt like reclaiming a part of myself. The zipper sounded louder than usual, like it was closing off the old life, the one where I'd been controlled, manipulated, too small in my own skin. Each zip of the bag was a small, silent victory, a signal that I was taking back control. At the clinic, Jessa was an unexpected ally. She'd always been professional, but now she was a force, standing behind me every step of the way. She helped document everything, every detail, every attempt at retaliation from Caleb, every threat. She kept everything organized, kept me calm. I hadn't expected the support, but Jessa made it clear that no matter what Caleb tried, she had my back. She wouldn't let him harm the clinic or the people I cared about. But the path ahead wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of it all felt too heavy, when the doubt crept in. Would I be safe? Would anyone believe me? But as I looked at Nora, her eyes filled with resolve as she zipped up the last bag, I realized that I wasn't alone anymore. Today I know that the hardest part of breaking free is learning to trust your instincts. And the moment you do, you realize just how much power you've always had. The interview room smelled like stale coffee and paper, the kind of air that made everything feel claustrophobic. I sat across from Caleb, his usual veneer of charm nowhere to be found. His shirt was too tight around the collar, the tie a little too loose, and his hands kept shifting on the table as if he were trying to make himself comfortable in a seat he hadn't planned on sitting in. But I wasn't fooled. He still wore his I'm in control face, the one he used to wear when he wanted to manipulate a situation, make himself the center of attention, and twist it all in his favor. Detective Sato sat next to me, calm, focused, not giving Caleb an inch. His presence was reassuring, a quiet authority that seemed to fill the room in a way Caleb couldn't quite control. He tried to charm Sato, like it was a sales call, his words smooth, rehearsed. "I'm just a good guy trying to help people," he said, leaning forward with that disarming smile of his. "I'm a mentor, a volunteer. People know me for my generosity." It didn't matter how many times Caleb tried to sell that image. The detective wasn't buying it. I could feel Caleb's eyes flick toward me, a brief, sharp glance that sent a spike of tension through the room. It wasn't just a look, it was a question, an accusation. "How could you do this to me?" His eyes said everything. He wasn't mad that he was being questioned. He was mad that I had betrayed him. That's how he saw it. In his mind, I owed him loyalty more than I owed myself the truth. The familiar weight of his control pressed down on me again, but I wasn't the same woman who had allowed him to manipulate me for so long. Detective Sato didn't seem to notice the tension between us. He flipped open a manila folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside with clinical detachment. Then he began to speak, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "We've reviewed your travel records, Caleb. They don't match up with the company's reimbursement policies." He slid a page toward Caleb. "There's also a discrepancy in your donor records and travel expenses. We've also found 2 device logs linking you to communications you haven't disclosed." Caleb's confident smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. The cracks were starting to show. Sato continued, unflinching. "We've also received reports from Maya. She's a victim of threats you made. There are messages where you clearly state, 'My wife can't know.' And we've also confirmed the misuse of company resources. The compliance records are damning. It was happening. The mask was slipping, piece by piece." Caleb's face went pale as the evidence piled up in front of him. For the first time in a long time, he looked uncomfortable, his usual arrogance replaced by a flicker of fear. He tried to salvage it, of course. His lips twitched, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, his voice losing its usual charm. This is all just misunderstanding." I could feel the micro-humiliation creeping up again. His attempt at denial was so transparent, so desperate. He was trying to shift the blame, trying to gaslight not only me but the entire room. His usual tactic, deny, 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 but Sato wasn't having it. "The inconsistencies in your travel records, the falsified documentation, it's not a misunderstanding, Caleb." The detective's voice never wavered, a steady force of truth that Caleb couldn't talk over. "It's a pattern, a deliberate attempt to cover your tracks." Caleb's face tightened, his jaw clenched as the truth closed in on him. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to summon some sort of defense. His eyes darted between the documents, the walls closing in around him. His story started to shift, like watching someone change lanes without signaling. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice suddenly smaller, as if he were trying to make the issue seem less severe. "Maybe I didn't follow all the rules, but it's not like I'm hurting anyone. I'm just trying to make a living." The minimization was painful to watch. The bravado was gone, replaced by an attempt to downplay his actions, to minimize the consequences of what he'd done. But it didn't work. Then came the blame. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising, trying to turn the tables. "If my wife hadn't been so paranoid, none of this would have happened. She's unstable. She made me do things." There it was, the classic Caleb move. Turn it all on me, deflecting attention from himself and painting me as the cause of everything. I'd seen this tactic 1,000 times before, but this time, it didn't land. This time, It felt weak. Elliot had warned me that Caleb would try to manipulate the narrative, but watching him fail so spectacularly was a kind of justice I didn't know I needed. By the end of the interview, Caleb's story had unraveled. Each attempt to deny, minimize, and blame had been documented, recorded, and exposed for what it was: manipulation. His employer was already moving toward termination, and the legal ramifications were just beginning. The more we uncovered, the more women came forward under Drew Hale, and Caleb's empire of lies started to crumble. Today I know that the truth has a way of bending, of shaping the story until everything breaks open. And when it does, the person who thought they were in control finds themselves with nothing but the weight of their own lies. The divorce papers arrived one morning, thick and impersonal. Elliot had filed them with protective measures in place, financial restraints, everything outlined clearly. The legal words on the page felt surreal, like they were for someone else. But as I read through the document, I could feel the weight of each clause, each sentence. It was the first official step toward the end of a life I had built around lies. I'd never thought I'd be in this position, but here I was. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't for months. Caleb's presence, his dominance, had warped every corner of it. But now, it was different. The space felt more mine than it ever had, even though the shadow of his betrayal hung over everything. I changed the locks that afternoon. Each turn of the key felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of my own life. I set boundaries like laying bricks, solid, unyielding, and necessary. I could hear the click of the locks as they settled into place, a sound that echoed in the quiet house. I wasn't just securing doors, I was securing myself. Caleb's first reaction was the kind of thing I had expected from him: emails, long, drawn-out apologies with no accountability. His words were the same as they always were: careful, calculated, designed to make me feel like the problem. He told me he was sorry for what happened, but never once mentioned his own actions. It was all about how he'd been misunderstood, how I had overreacted. There was no mention of the years of manipulation, no mention of the lies that had piled up between us. The same old Caleb spinning a narrative where I was the one in the wrong. But I didn't respond. The next email was colder, sharper. He accused me of being ungrateful, of ruining everything he had worked so hard for. The tone was crueler, more desperate. He wanted to reassert control, and when that didn't work, he used anger instead. He was trying to provoke me, trying to get me to break, to slip back into the version of myself that he could control. But I didn't respond. Not once. The silence between us was my answer. There were other moments, too. Friends who loved Caleb's public persona, the man he played for the world, reached out, concerned. They told me to be careful with how I handled things, as if the truth, my truth, was something reckless, as if exposing his lies was somehow dangerous. Their words felt like another layer of pressure, but I didn't let them in. I couldn't, not anymore. Caleb had already stolen so much from me. I wasn't going to let his friends, his fans, convince me to go back into the shadows. I leaned on Nora, Jessa, and the structure of my own profession. Their support became my anchor, the foundation that kept me standing. Routine became my refuge. Sleep, work, dinner at the table with Jessa's reminders to breathe, to take things one step at a time. Maya's care continued under another clinician, and that gave me a quiet sense of peace. My responsibility to her remained intact, and I upheld the ethical boundaries I had always believed in. I kept my professional life separate from my personal turmoil, and it felt like a small victory, a line I couldn't let anyone cross. I wasn't just ending my marriage, I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. Every decision, every boundary I set, every step I took felt like air filling my lungs after years of holding my breath. Today I know that sometimes the hardest part of moving forward is learning to breathe again. The past will always try to pull you back, but when you're ready to let go, you realize you've been holding your own power all along. Caleb showed up at my door like he always did when he thought he could still manipulate the situation. He was polished, suit pressed, hair perfectly styled, that fake nobility in his posture, trying to make me believe that he was the wounded one in all of this. The same costume he'd worn for years, a performance he thought still fooled me. But I wasn't fooled anymore. His eyes were searching, as if expecting me to crumble, to feel pity for him. His words came out slow, calculated, like he was giving me the chance to understand that I was the one who'd failed him. "Lauren, I've been thinking," he began, his voice almost too soft, too careful. "I know this has been hard for both of us, but you have to understand I was only trying to protect you, protect us." He always played the victim, tried to make everything seem like it was for our benefit, as if all his lies, all his manipulation were just some grand act of love. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I didn't even want to hear it. There was a small, cruel part of me that wanted to remind him of every time he'd belittled my career, every time he'd called my work pretend, every time he'd laughed at my degree. But instead of responding, I stood there in silence, watching him squirm. The silence stretched between us, and it wasn't uncomfortable for me anymore. I had taken back control, and he could see it. He tried to soften his tone, his eyes flicking around the room, his fingers tapping on his phone as if he could find the right words. "Lauren, you know this is hard for me, too. I've made mistakes, but don't you think we can still work things out? You and me. We can—" I cut him off. "No, Caleb, we can't. Not anymore." I didn't yell, didn't get emotional. I just stated the truth. The calmness of my voice seemed to unsettle him more than any outburst could have. The records spoke louder than any words I could say now. The compliance findings, the documented alias use, the financial restraints, everything I had fought for, every step I had taken to distance myself from him, had paid off. His lies were finally exposed. My degree, the one he mocked so often, was now something I could stand on. It had been the key to unlocking everything, the one thing I had always underestimated in myself. He had feared it. He had feared what it let me see, what it allowed me to understand about him. His face tightened as I mentioned the financial restraints, the boundaries that had been set. He wanted to control everything, but not anymore. His power over me, over my choices, over my sense of worth, it had all crumbled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I didn't need revenge. I needed closure. I needed safety. And I needed the clean separation between truth and performance. Caleb had played a part in my life, a part that I no longer needed. The person he tried to convince me I was, the one who doubted herself, the one who was weak, it was all gone. The woman standing in front of him now was someone who had seen through his mask, someone who had finally learned to trust her own strength. He tried to push again, his voice growing desperate, but it was too late. The words had lost their power, fallen away like dead skin. I wasn't the woman he used to belittle anymore. When I finally walked out, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. The feeling of the door closing behind me was like taking a deep breath after holding it for years. I wasn't just leaving him, I was returning to myself, the woman I had once been, before he had made me doubt everything. Today I know that insight is power, especially when you stop giving it away to those who don't deserve it. Now I understand he mocked my degree because he feared what it let me see. And when I walked out, I didn't feel like a wife abandoned. I felt like a woman who was finally returning to herself, with a profession he could never rename.